Welcome back to the channel. Today, as requested, I'm bringing you the dress construction from the Hello Summer pattern for Poppy Parker. Earlier this week, I put out the tutorial for how to create the ruffled halter top. So I'm going to be using some lightweight cotton as the lining and then this really groovy print for the exterior portion of the dress. Before I got started, I wanted to check my ribbon supply to see what type of belt I would like, because this is a high-waisted plunging neckline dress and I think it finishes well with a bow right at the center of her chest. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my couple of pieces that are included in the pattern, and in this case it's very small amount of pattern pieces. It's just the skirt front and side front, the skirt back sections, the front of the actual halter, and then the back. So let's go ahead and grab our fabric, get our pattern pieces cut out, and start this sewing process. When you're cutting out your fabric, you can cut the lining and the fabric separate, or you can cut them together as I'm showing here. I just stacked it. You want to make sure you iron the fabric really well so that it nestles well together. I'm going to fold the fabric in half and get a cut 2 on everything, and then actually the skirt section requires one additional cut, so I'm going to do that separately. Remember to follow the grain lines on your pattern with the selvage edge of your fabric in most cases. One thing to note when cutting out your pattern is if you are using something with an actual pattern, you want to make sure that that third cut of the skirt is actually very similar to the ones that you previously did. So I just laid the pattern piece on the fabric to make sure that I could line the wiggly lines of this skirt up. So now that we have our pattern pieces cut out, we're going to start with that front section, and we're going to sew the darts in both pieces as well as in the lining. I would recommend when you're putting the pattern together that you use a smaller than normal stitch length. In this case, I'm going to use about a 2. You want to refer back to the dart as indicated on the pattern, and you're going to actually just fold the pattern piece with right sides together, sewing from the bust edge up to the point of the dart, and you're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. As I've said before, I recommend that you actually tie the darts off versus backstitching because the garment is so small. With all of the darts tied and trimmed, we're going to grab our back sections and we're going to place it right sides together with the front of the bodice and sew the shoulder seam. Once you have all of the shoulder seams pressed open, I would recommend that you go ahead and trim back that seam allowance. It's a little bit easier to trim it after you've pressed it open than it is to press it after you've trimmed it. The next step is to apply the lining to the front of the bodice. I'm going to place it with right sides together, and on this particular piece, which is considered the left back opening, I'm going around the armhole edge, up the front of the neckline, across the neck, and down the center back. On the other side, which is considered the right back opening, I'm going to skip that step of closing the center back seam and actually finish it with a zigzag stitch. With the lining sewn to the front portion of the bodice, you do want to check both sides before you trim into the seam allowance. And I say that in several videos because I have made mistakes before where I trimmed the seam allowance away and then I needed to make a correction to that seam. So once you've confirmed that everything looks to be pretty good, you're going to clip in towards the curved edge of the armhole opening as well as around the neck edge, and you're going to trim that seam allowance down, and then we're going to get both pieces turned right side out. I showed in the halter top video how I like to use this large bobby pin to get the bodice turned right side out. You're going to be taking the front section of the bodice and pushing it through the shoulder channel and bringing it out the other side. We're going to do that on both pieces, and I'm going to get that started now. This is a quick view of the outside of the bodice now that we have it turned and pressed. And this is the left back opening. That's where we actually did the finished edge. And this is the right back opening where the edge is raw. This is just one of many ways that you can finish the garment, but I do this in a lot of my outfits. So if you do another pattern going forward, you'll be familiar with that process. With the front of the garment finished, we're going to actually tack it together right here at the bust edge, just using a needle and thread. And then we'll move on to construction of the skirt. With the bodice sewn together, we're actually going to put the back and fronts together at the side seam. You have two choices at this step. The easiest method is going to be to go ahead and fold it with right sides together and sew those side seams. That will create a raw edge on the inside, which you can then do a little bit of a zigzag stitch over or trim down and use some fray check. And I think that is absolutely the easiest method. If you like a more finished garment on the inside, you're going to have to open up the lining away from the exterior portion of the garment like this, and you're going to place the lining to the lining with right sides together, and then the actual garment to the garment right sides together. This is a really small area to stitch in, so you have to just take your time and just really be patient with it, and that will create a nice finished edge on the inside of the garment. So for this demonstration, I will do that method for people more interested, but remember you have that first choice as well. So here's a quick view of where we are with the bodice, and we have everything put together, and now we're going to move on to doing the actual skirt. I did want to show you what it looks like on the inside if you finish that seam by placing the lining to the lining and the fabric to the fabric. So now that we have that done, we're going to go ahead and set the bodice to the side. We're going to take our three skirt sections, which are the front and the side front, sew them all together at the side seams, and then we're going to grab our back skirt sections and sew them together, both on the exterior portion of the garment as well as on the lining. With all of the skirt pieces sewn together, you've checked both sides of the garment, you've trimmed that seam allowance down, and you've given it a press. We've constructed the lining in exactly the same way, so we're just going to place the two pieces right sides together and pin it together at the hemline and go ahead and sew that hem. All right, I've trimmed into the seam allowance at the hemline, and I've also turned the lining to the inside of the dress. I do want to draw your attention to how you want that lining to appear on the back. You want to roll it just so that there's about a 1/16 of an inch of the fabric from the front of the dress showing when you're looking at the lining. That will prevent the lining from being seen at the hemline of Poppy. Just a few more steps and our project is finished. You're going to grab your skirt assembly and you're going to find the center front. You're going to match the center front to the center front of the bodice and pin those two pieces together with right sides. You're going to pull that gather stitch at the skirt area and you're going to match it to the front of the bodice, and we're going to get that seam sewn. Once you have the skirt assembly pinned to the bodice, the thing you want to take into account is that on the right back opening, you're matching up the zigzagged edges, and on the left back opening, you have a 1/4 inch of the skirt left past the finished edge. So you're just going to fold that back before you sew the actual waist seam. So here's our dress with the skirt assembly sewn to the bodice. And as you can see how it's finishing on the inside, it's fully lined with the exception of the waist seam. You can trim that seam allowance down after checking both sides of the garment and finish it with a zigzag stitch. You're also going to want to take a zigzag stitch along the right back opening. Once we complete those couple of steps, we'll put the garment right sides together, so from the hem edge to the dot as indicated on the pattern. So here's a quick fit to our doll as we finish our project, and I think it's coming together great. With the addition of the ribbon belt, our Hello Summer dress is complete. If you're interested in seeing construction of the halter top with the ruffled neckline, please check for that link in the description below. As you can imagine, there's tons and tons of different options for creating videos for doll clothes sewing. I remembered this series of human patterns that would show you how to take some basic or simple pattern blocks and turn them into a variety of different styles. I thought this would be a great concept to work with for our dolls. We could take some basic blouse pattern pieces and turn it into a variety of styles by manipulating the sleeves, adding ruffles, adding elastic, or maybe even adding some shirring. Please let me know in the comment section below if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. Thank you guys so much for following along with me today. Please hit that like and subscribe button if this type of content is helpful and useful to you. Share it with your friends, and I'll see you in the next video.